June Jordan returned home from her studies in Germany and was thrilled to be back. Although she had the opportunity to stay, she couldn't bear the thought of being away from her parents and her homeland any longer. As she hugged her family and drove through the familiar streets, she couldn't believe she was finally home. After unpacking and resting, the whole family gathered at the table to talk about her future. "Well, June, now that you've graduated, you'll be working in my firm," said her father. "I've been waiting for this day for a long time. I can't think of a better assistant than my own daughter whom I can trust." "Absolutely, Dad. I'll work hard for the business, but I also want to make a positive impact on the community through charity work. It's a popular trend in Europe, and I think it's something we should also consider." "I completely agree with you, my daughter. Supporting charitable causes is not only good for society, but it also helps to enhance a company's reputation and standing in the community." "Yes, I'm passionate about giving back to those in need, not just for the sake of boosting our image. I've been keeping up with local events and issues on social media, and I'm excited to start making a difference." "And as for your personal life, June, it's time to start thinking about settling down. You're 25 now, and I was worried you might have stayed in Germany and married a German, but I'm glad you came back single. Let's celebrate your 25th anniversary at home with a big gathering. It's not just about the milestone, but it's also a chance for you to meet all our employees, business partners, and competitors," suggested June's father. "I'm not a fan of those fancy banquets and buffets," protested June. "But sometimes it's necessary to attend these events. It will give you an opportunity to meet new people and make a good impression. And who knows, you might find your soulmate at the event," added Christina, June's mother. June playfully pouted and responded, "Mom, you're already trying to marry me off." Her mother continued undeterred, "We should invite Claude Armstrong and his son Jonathan. He's a very nice young man who recently graduated. And also Clyde Richardson, who, although he's older, is a very decent man." June was feeling genuinely offended and said, "Mom, if it's just a show, I won't go at all." Christina replied, "June, I'm thinking about your future. You're 25 now, it's time to settle down and start a family. Your father and I would love to have grandchildren." June replied, "Maybe I shouldn't have gone to school and learned things. I should have learned sewing instead and marry a locksmith and had lots of kids." Kevin Jordan interjected, "Christina, who gets married and has kids at 16 these days. June has studied hard and needs to prove herself. She'll have time for grandchildren and everything else." Christina finally relented and said, Okay, I'm not going to force anyone to get married. I was just voicing my dream. I hope it comes true someday, but it's not urgent." The grand banquet was held with utmost elegance, and all the guests, including their sons, were in attendance. However, June's personal life remained unchanged. She had decided to focus on showcasing her professional abilities first before settling down with a family of her own. June worked fervently at her father's firm, but her true passion lay in participating in charity projects. The welfare of the underprivileged had always been a great concern for her. Although her father approved of her noble cause, he believed that June was investing too much of her time in it. "I had hoped that you would take on a leadership role, and that would have been wonderful. But visiting shelters and orphanages frequently and expending so much mental energy on them is unnecessary," said Kevin Jordan, expressing his concern. "But Daddy, you can't be involved in these things without being emotionally invested. But don't worry, I won't have a nervous breakdown. When I see a problem, I don't panic. I find solutions just like you taught me," June replied confidently. "That's great, but you should still leave some time for yourself. I fully agree with your mother on this," Kevin continued, and Christina nodded in agreement. Christina was much more vocal in expressing her dissatisfaction with June's preoccupation. "June, you woke up so late yesterday again. I would love to hear that you went on a date, or went to the theater or restaurant, but something tells me that's not the case. We're opening a crisis center. It's a lot of work, but it's much needed. It'll provide medical and legal assistance for pregnant minors. Look, I'll show you the rooms. They'll be built and then open, and pregnant teenagers will come flooding in. When are you going to think about your own life? Christina exclaimed. I am thinking about my life. Helping people is a big part of my life too, and don't worry about it. June replied, staying calm. How can I not worry? You need to take some days off. Don't you want to be happier yourself when you see all these deprived people? Christina continued, her concern evident. I am happy. I'm happy that I can help people. Our foundation helped a boy who graduated from an orphanage get an apartment. Isn't that happiness? And personal happiness. Sorry, Mom, I didn't want to tell you, but you know, if you hadn't watched me so vigilantly in my youth, maybe I would have found personal happiness sooner. Are you saying you would have gotten married at 16 or had an illegitimate child? Is that what you call happiness? Christina asked, her tone incredulous. Not necessarily. I wasn't planning on getting married while still in high school, but I would have learned how to relate to guys. And thanks to you, I grew up thinking that it was shameful to date and that I should focus on studying instead. I still feel that way and can't seem to shake it off, June explained. Why don't you see a therapist? Christina asked. I can't. I don't have the time, and I don't think it's necessary. Everything will come in its own time. Don't doubt it. I'm sure of it, June replied, ending the conversation. June's intuition proved right. As fate would have it, she met her soulmate in a cafe by chance. It was not at any high-profile event or carefully planned social gathering. As she rushed out of the office, headed to her usual lunch spot, she noticed a heartwarming scene that struck a chord within her. A young man, with a kind and gentle demeanor, was delivering a meal to an elderly beggar who was deeply grateful for the gesture. The man reciprocated the thanks and handed over some money, discreetly trying to avoid attention. While many would have overlooked this simple act of kindness, June was captivated. Compelled to take action, June approached the young man to introduce herself and inquire about working with their charity organization. She found him to be charming and immediately felt a connection. Perhaps it was a coincidence, or perhaps it was meant to be. Regardless, June knew that this was the start of something special. June approached the young man who had helped a beggar, expressing her admiration for his kindness. She introduced herself and invited him to participate in her organization that helps the homeless and people in difficult situations. Despite June's expectations of rejection, the young man named Norman Flowers was flattered but regretfully declined the offer, as he was already committed to working with several orphanages and a shelter for homeless animals. He added that helping those in need was in his nature, and he stopped by the cafe on his way. Norman invited June to have lunch with him, and they talked about their shared passion for helping those less fortunate. June was moved by Norman's actions and expressed her disappointment that more people did not try to make the world a better place for disadvantaged people. Norman shared her sentiment, acknowledging that many people treated their charitable efforts with contempt. However, he believed that even saving 1 out of 100 people was a significant achievement, despite the lack of understanding and support from the average person. June and Norman exchanged phone numbers, and June could tell from Norman's demeanor that their conversations and meetings were not limited to business. She enjoyed spending time with him, and the dates were always lavish with expensive gifts and trips to romantic locations. It was a new experience for June to feel loved and cherished. Her parents noticed the changes in her and were happy to see her so content. It seems like a prince has come to thaw out the Snow Queen with serious intentions, her mother, Christina Jordan, said. But you never know who he really is, her father, Kevin Jordan, replied dismissively. You're too hard to please, Christina. You were worried that June had no one, and now that someone has come along, you're afraid he's not good enough. But there are so many rich men out there looking for brides. Remember our friend's daughter? They barely got away from a fiance who wanted to steal their money. But June is not that kind of girl to fall for just anyone, her father reassured her. That's true, but she's also too kind. If someone shows her pity, especially if it's love, she might not resist. We should invite him over and get to know him better, her mother suggested. June and Norman quickly developed a strong bond, and she felt comfortable enough to invite him to her home. Her parents were pleased to meet him, and Norman made a good impression with his intelligence, courtesy, and apparent wealth. Although they didn't inquire too much about his family or occupation, Norman was open about his situation. I've been on my own for a long time and have had to rely on myself. My mom passed away, and I don't know my dad. The only family I have is my mom's sister, who's sick and needs my help. So I went into business, and I've made some progress, he shared. June's father was impressed by Norman's independence, but her mother was suspicious. I don't know. An orphan with no family? It's hard not to be suspicious. You should use your connections to find out more about his business and his past. She told her husband after the young couple left the table and went to June's room. Mr. Jordan was taken aback. What connections? Are you suggesting I spy on him, track him down myself, or hire a detective? Why not? Mrs. Jordan responded. He's going to be a part of our family. People are more responsible for choosing new owners for a cat than for their only daughter. I know you think he sounds good, but is he too good? Mr. Jordan threw his hands up. Oh God, I wash my hands of this. June will have to live her whole life as an old maid if it's up to you. I'll give him a hint that he should come wearing dirty shoes next time or learn to smoke. Otherwise, he won't see my daughter again. Mrs. Jordan chuckled. I'm just kidding, but God forbid I'm right. It would be too traumatic for June. June was oblivious to her mother's reservations, so she casually inquired about Norman's impression on her parents. Your parents are wonderful people, June. I'm glad they liked me, Norman replied with a smile. Did you propose to her already, Norman? Mrs. Jordan interjected. No, Mom, and even if I did, would you try to talk me out of it? June responded, amused. Of course not, dear. I would only suggest taking your time since you haven't known each other for long. We're not in a rush, Mom. Don't worry, June giggled with happiness. Their marriage seemed inevitable, even though Norman hadn't yet officially proposed. June introduced him to some of her friends, and he showed a great interest in charity work, proving to be knowledgeable and well-versed in various topics. June was overjoyed, and her confidence in him grew each day. He was kind, attentive, and even had a soft spot for animals, often stopping to help them on their walks. One day, Norman took June and her parents out to a restaurant and proposed. Wedding preparations began, and even Mrs. Jordan's doubts had subsided as Norman had proven himself to be an exceptional and decent man. However, June began to feel that his manners and discretion were a bit excessive. He's always so polite and proper. Sometimes I wish he'd let loose and show some passion, she confided to her best friend. Despite her minor concerns, June was thrilled to be marrying such a wonderful man and couldn't wait to start their life together. Excuse me, Miss June, I may be intruding on your personal affairs, but have you introduced your young man or fiancé to all of us yet? I recently saw him on the street, and his behavior raised doubts about his involvement in charitable organizations. What happened? I asked, surprised by June's response. What could he have done? Well, a homeless man approached him, perhaps not entirely sober, and began begging for money. From what I gathered, your fiancé not only shooed him away, but also pushed him roughly and even kicked him when he fell. At that moment, his face was so enraged that it frightened me, Catherine recounted. Well, Catherine, I believe you must be mistaken. It couldn't have been Mr. Norman, I replied, unconvinced. I wouldn't have told you if I had any doubts, Catherine retorted, pursing her lips. I wanted to confront him about his inappropriate behavior, but I rushed to the poor man's aid while your fiancé had already driven off in his car. It's difficult to believe, I murmured. I'll attempt to speak with him, but I'm in no rush to do so. As she reflected on her lover's behavior, she remembered witnessing some heartwarming scenes that made her question if Norman was being overly dramatic. He seemed to rush to every homeless person and stray dog he encountered, but anyone involved in charitable work knows that simply giving money or food may not always be the best form of help. However, she knew that direct questioning would not necessarily provide her with answers. If Norman was lying, he would likely continue to do so, and if her doubts were unfounded, he would have every reason to be offended. She realized that she would have to investigate for herself and came up with a rather unusual plan. Marie, you're the only one who can help me. I need a modern homeless woman's costume for one evening. Is that possible? I mean, not just a poor woman, but a homeless one, she asked. Of course, as much as you like. What are you planning? A masquerade or something? Marie inquired. It's for charity work. I want to dress up as a beggar for a small performance, Jane explained. Marie pulled out a bracket with the most tattered outfits. We'll dress you up here. Choose something unrecognizable, and we'll use makeup to make you look the part, she said. I want something that will conceal my face. Can you add some makeup, stains, or bruises to make it more realistic? Jane asked. You're in luck. We have a talented makeup artist, Helen. She can paint something so that even your mother wouldn't recognize you. Let's get you dressed up and take you to her, Marie replied. You're going to look like a real beggar. Helen had taken June to the makeup artist and went to tend to other things. When she looked back at June half an hour later, she was taken aback. Helen, it seems you've gone a bit too far. I brought you a beautiful young friend, and you return her to me looking like an unrecognizable beggar. June, don't be surprised if you and the other homeless people get more alms than usual. How are you going to walk around the city like that? She exclaimed. June didn't really have much faith in the success of her plan, so she had brought 2 of her father's bodyguards with her. One of them was driving the car, and she nervously tapped her finger on the window. The guard opened the window slightly, and with a look of disgust, he peered at the unkempt old woman with a faded black eye. What do you want? He gruffly asked. It's me, don't you recognize me? June laughed. Wow, Miss June, what are you doing? I would have known it was you just by your voice, the guard said. He hastily opened the door and let June into the cabin. Everything is as we agreed, guys. Stop the car and wait, she said to the guards. After filling in the men on her plan, she hoped that it wouldn't escalate. She already knew that Norman had lied to her. She had called the charities with which he claimed to work, only to find out that they knew nothing about him and had received no donations. She didn't want to know more. The masquerade was her way of avoiding a painful conversation. However, she still loved Norman and hoped that he wasn't a cruel person. She stepped out of the car, hunched over to appear old and homeless, and began wandering along the street where she knew Norman would pass by. Finally, she spotted him, a handsome and confident man. She quickly approached him, calling out, "My son, please help me, for God's sake." Norman looked at her, made a face, but didn't stop. June continued following him. Would you at least give me some bread? I haven't eaten for a week. She heard the despair in her own voice and realized how it felt to be a real homeless person. Norman gritted his teeth. Get lost. But June persisted, grabbing his sleeve. Please, just a little help. Fuck you. Norman shouted, grabbed her arm, and pushed her away with great force. She collapsed onto the pavement, and instantly her bodyguards rushed to her aid. One of them seized the young man's arm, while the other assisted the elderly woman to her feet. What's happening? Norman demanded, but his eyes fell upon the fallen woman and recognized her features despite the layer of makeup. In her usual voice, June spoke up. So now it's clear that you're just as helpful to orphanages and animal shelters as you were to me. I know the truth about everything. Have a good day. With that, she followed her guards back to the waiting car. What are you doing? Norman shouted in confusion, attempting to pursue his fiancée, but he quickly realized it was futile. "Damn it, she's gone," he thought as he stood in the middle of the sidewalk, watching the car disappear from sight. How could she have come up with such a scheme? And what in the world has gotten into her? What do I do now? Norman wasn't a philanthropist or a businessman. He was an ordinary man from a family with an average income, but he had big dreams. He didn't have any special feelings for his parents, who had raised and educated him. Norman felt that he didn't owe them anything, and he had left home long ago to pursue his own happiness. His looks and his intellect were gifts from his parents, and he was grateful for that. However, Norman didn't want to be labeled as an opportunist, a gigolo, or a crook. He saw himself as a hardworking individual who couldn't afford to meet all his needs on his salary alone. He survived by being a companion to wealthy women, their wives or daughters, and sometimes even businesswomen. It all depended on his luck. Norman didn't steal or extort money, but he gave his wealthy companions happiness and pleasure. He knew that he couldn't continue this lifestyle forever and was looking for a way out. In addition, Norman made sure to provide his companions with happiness and never resorted to stealing or extorting money from them. They were willing to do anything to keep him by their side, and Norman even entertained the idea of marriage if the opportunity presented itself. As he grew older, he realized that he couldn't continue his lifestyle of jumping from woman to woman forever. This realization hit him even harder after being dumped by a previous partner, a wealthy and attractive older woman who seemed open to the idea of marrying him. However, she eventually chose someone younger and seemingly better than Norman, causing him to feel rejected. It was then that a friend suggested he meet June, leading him to where he is now. "I used to be a student at that university, the daughter of a wealthy man, but also a smart girl. I'm now 25 years old and unmarried, and you seem like a good option. I would do it myself, but it's been years since I graduated. If you can bring it to marriage, then your life will be set." "Is she not attractive?" Norman asked with hesitation. "To be honest, I haven't seen her, but with that kind of money, you can't expect someone unattractive. As a friend, I'll give you a good deal on the price." As the saying goes, there's no such thing as a free lunch. Norman had to pay a hefty sum to obtain June's information, and that was just the beginning. He had to meticulously plan his approach and learn everything he could about her in order to seduce her. This required even more money, from purchasing the appropriate attire to showering her with expensive gifts and flowers. But it all paid off in the end when he met June, who was not only beautiful but also smitten with him. Her parents were delighted to meet him, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. However, Norman soon realized that he had fallen in love with June and that their relationship was built on deceit. He knew that he had to come clean, but he was afraid of losing her. He decided to call her and gauge how serious she was about their relationship. He knew that if she found out the truth, she would likely leak the information and ruin his reputation. He had to tread carefully and hope that she would understand his predicament. Norman dialed Jane's number, hoping to salvage their relationship. "Jane, it's me, Norman. I wanted to check how serious you were about canceling the wedding. Please don't do this, I love you," Norman pleaded. "I don't believe you, and I'll make sure nobody else does either," Jane spat back. Norman's heart sank. He knew he had to act fast to salvage his reputation. There must be a way to make things right. "I don't want to hurt anyone else," Norman said, his voice shaking. But before he could say anything else, Jane hung up on him, leaving Norman alone with his thoughts. Feeling defeated, Norman decided to return the gifts he had given to Jane, hoping it would show her how serious he was about changing. "Jane, I'm sorry. I'm leaving the gifts with the concierge. I hope they won't be used to seduce anyone else," Norman said, leaving a message on Jane's voicemail. Deep down, Norman knew it was over between them, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of regret for what he had done. He vowed to never let his pursuit of wealth and status cloud his judgment again. She went to cry and now suffer. Benefactress, at least the gifts will return, maybe I will sell, and decided to spoil me all the same. But it's nothing for my age is enough fools. Women are like that. Warn them, do not warn. June really cried. Who would not cry in a situation like this? A week before the wedding. So disappointed in the groom. One consolation, the wedding did not happen, otherwise there would have been much more problems and shame too. Now she has to explain to her parents what happened, and she herself does not understand how it happened. How it was that she believed and fell in love at first sight. Probably it was her destiny to live alone, without any husbands, children, without love. And then, as if by chance, mother walked in. She did not know about the collapse of her daughter's love, and was only thinking about the upcoming wedding. She went to cry and suffer, despite her good intentions. At least the gifts will be returned, maybe I can sell them. Women are unpredictable, whether you warn them or not. Norman thought to himself, feeling bitter about the situation. June was devastated after what happened. Who wouldn't be when their wedding was called off a week before? She couldn't believe that she fell for Norman's lies and false promises. Now, she had to face her parents and explain everything. She was starting to lose hope in finding true love and having a family. Just then, her mother walked in, unaware of the situation. She was excited about the upcoming wedding and asked June about the preparations. June couldn't hold back her tears and broke down in front of her mother, telling her everything that happened. Her mother comforted her, assuring her that everything will be all right and that she deserves someone who truly loves her. June, your aunt called to congratulate you, but she won't be able to attend. Why were you crying? It's okay, Mom. The wedding is off, so there's no need to fuss anymore. What happened? Did you have a fight with Norman? No, we broke up for good. He turned out to be a liar and someone completely different than who he claimed to be. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I'll explain everything later, but for now, I just need some rest. Of course, my dear. I'm sorry this happened, but I trust you made the right decision. You don't need to cry anymore. Take all the time you need to recover. Mrs. Jordan left the room, feeling sorry for her daughter. She couldn't help but think, he was too good to be true. A polite and charming man like him, I knew something wasn't right. She shared the news with her husband, but advised him not to rush to talk to June just yet. Don't push her too hard, she said. Let her have some time alone to recover. She'll tell us everything when she's ready. Mr. Jordan was outraged. How can you say it's not a big deal if she's crying? I'll make him pay for hurting our daughter. But Mrs. Jordan insisted. We'll deal with him later. For now, we need to respect June's wishes and let her be. June, feeling a bit more composed, packed all the gifts her fiancé had given her into a box and took it to the concierge. She then went out for her usual evening tea, trying her best to hide any sign of tears. During the tea, she spoke briefly about Norman's true character and asked to move on from the subject. However, her father, Mr. Jordan, was furious and vowed to take action against Norman. June tried to calm him down, insisting that it was her situation to handle and that she had already resolved it safely. She suggested that her father post about Norman on the internet to warn others and put an end to his schemes. Mr. Jordan was hesitant, but eventually agreed to drop the matter. June threw herself into her work in charity, avoiding thoughts about her personal life, which left her feeling frustrated. She couldn't help but worry that she would never trust anyone again after what happened. Mr. Jordan tried to reassure her that she wasn't poor or stupid, and that she would overcome this setback and find happiness. He had faith that someone who did so many good deeds could not help but be happy in the end. Despite her previous heartbreak, June didn't lose her trust in people entirely. However, she did become extremely sensitive to any insincerity, which made it difficult to build new relationships. But when she met one of Henry's new employees, she quickly realized that he was just like her, someone who did his best without any false pretenses. As they worked together, their friendship grew, and soon they began to spend time outside of work as well, going to lunch or visiting cafes in the evenings. June saw that this man was genuine and truly cared about his work and her. She didn't have to doubt his sincerity or worry about being deceived. Despite his occasional foolishness, she felt herself falling in love with him. However, after her previous failed relationship, she was hesitant to believe in her own happiness. But Henry was patient, waiting for June's heart to thaw, and eventually it did. The day he confessed his love to her, June felt truly happy for the first time in a long while.